Everyone to our presentation on remote depositions. My name is Adam Carlson. I'm one of the managing partners at Casper, Meadow, Schwartz & Cook, a personal injury firm in Walnut Creek. And we have an important topic today. I've been a part of a number of remote depositions since the lockdown, and I've got my bearings for the most part on taking and defending these. And it appears as though remote depositions are likely to be a part of our practice even after the shelter-in-place ends. So it's imperative we know what the heck is going on. And our big picture goal is to get everyone comfortable and confident to take on a remote deposition. So whether you have one upcoming on your calendar, you're thinking about whether you'd like to schedule one, or you've been a part of one and just want to get more comfortable with it all, you're at the right place. We're going to be going through a variety of topics implicated by remote depositions, things like pre-deposition issues to remote deposition admonitions, to my favorite, exhibits, which I think is the most intimidating and challenging aspect of a remote deposition. So we're going to be getting into some nuts and bolts issues and giving you some good tips and tricks on how to do this. For today's presentation, if there are questions, then we recommend you put it in the chat down below. I don't know if you've used the chat function before on Zoom, but there's a button down below at the bottom of your screen. Just enter the question into the chat. You can see that Nick Casper's already put a nice little word in there for us. Thank you, Nick. So if it makes sense, the panelists will be monitoring the chat if there are questions that come up, and if it makes sense for us to address the question, we will. At the end of our presentation, if people stick around and there are questions, then you can, and you have a question you want to ask, then you can raise your hand. There's a raise your hand function. If you click on participants, you can choose to raise your hand and we can figure out how to unmute you and address your question. So with that, I'd like to introduce our panel. Let them say a quick hello before we get going into the presentation. The first person I'd like to introduce is Jamie Herron, who is the litigation section co-president and an associate at Holland and Knight in San Francisco. And she's doing a great job as litigation section co-president and helped bring this panel together for this presentation. So,
hi everybody. I practice trust dispute litigation and IP litigation. So I'll give you some of my tips, especially in the meet and confer process, about pushing towards getting everyone's agreement on going to a remote deposition in the first place.
And the next two panelists work for VERITEXT, which is a company that offers court reporting services for remote depositions, and they will actually be doing most of the presenting today. They have a nice presentation for us. The first, we have Jonathan Pearl, who is a senior account executive with VERITEXT.
Thank you, Adam, and welcome everyone. I've been in the deposition business for 15 years now. It's been a while. Been with VERITEXT for 11.5 years. I have probably, since this pandemic hit or the shelter in place, I've probably done 150 demos, so I'm intimately familiar with how this process works, and that's actually how Jamie brought VERITEXT into this presentation, as she saw one of my demos. So I'm excited to show you guys our tools.
Thank you, Jonathan. And lastly, we have Claire Foley, who is the Director of Sales in Northern California for VERITEXT, who I will let her say hi, and then she will keep on going because she is our first presenter. So with that, Claire, please take it away.
All right, thanks. Welcome everybody, good afternoon. Claire Foley from VERITEXT here. And my background, just very briefly, I've been 25 years in the litigation space, the last 15 of which I have been in litigation technology, deposition technology, and court reporting, of course, with VERITEXT. So like Jonathan, we are very well versed in remote depositions, and VERITEXT itself has been doing remote depositions for over 12 years, leading with our thoughts and ideas and also leading with our technology. So we have a plethora of knowledge and information that we are here to share with you today. Now, we are aware this is a 1-hour CLE proceeding, and so we don't want to belabor any point too long, but of course, if anybody has inquiries afterwards about different aspects, we'll be happy to answer those. So without further ado, we will start in the presentation. And how we're going to work it is that I will be really in the slide deck for the first half of the presentation. And then Jonathan is going to get into Adam's favorite topic, exhibits, which is really the meat, right? Because we're all here, we're on this meeting today. You're 95% there in terms of doing remote deposition. So let's get started. So let's take a look at the world that we've lived in up until March 13th, I think it was. It seems like 10 lifetimes ago, right? So here is our traditional in-person deposition setup. Yes, we've got our witness, our court reporter, we've got our taking attorney, co-counsel, witness, a myriad of different people who appear at the deposition. And of course, all of our exhibits are typically, not always, but typically in paper. And we pass those around after we've had the reporter go ahead and mark an exhibit. We pass those courtesy copies around the table. And of course, in many of our depositions, we also have the addition of adding in the videographer to video record the witness as well. And that will go along with that final testimony. And here we are in the time of COVID. It looks a lot different, right? We're not even working from our offices. We can see all our backgrounds. We're working in our homes, or in my case, my remote home right now. And so we're taking depositions is quite hard. And if you look at our history doing remote depositions, we do remote depositions all over the world, all over the country, but typically you have at least some personnel in a law firm where you've got fantastic internet, great phones, multitudes of computers, monitors, screens. We don't have that at home. And even if our law firm has provided that to us, we also have to think about opposing counsel and witness. So there are a myriad of different things that one has to think about, and that's what we're going to be focusing on right now. And again, remember, what we're doing here is a high-level view of some of the notions and ideas that we'll be pushing through in terms of how we manage our depositions, and more detail can, of course, be provided at a later date. So let's start looking at some key considerations for taking depositions. Preparing and testing. And I can tell you this from our history, you know, honestly, back on March 13th when all of this starts to come to fruition, the first few days, depositions just stopped. And since then, they've just grown and grown and grown with various things that have happened. And the realization, to Adam's point, that we're in this for the long haul. And we see when problems happen at depositions, it's typically because people are not testing ahead. And we'll be talking about how we can do that and how simple it is to do a few things to make sure that we have a seamless deposition. Connecting early, no running into the conference room 5 minutes before the deposition. Obviously, so important is capturing the record. And so we're going to be talking about how do we do that and what can we, as the participants in depositions, do to enhance that. Managing of exhibits. We also want to think if we're going to videotape our depositions, how does that happen? Some additional consideration are stipulations, right? So taking a remote deposition, my witness is not with my court reporter. Breakouts, how do we deal with breaks, lunches, marking of exhibits, how do we handle that? And again, Jonathan will be going into this in detail. Technical issues, how do we handle technical issues like webcams, phones, computers, multiple monitors, people who are not familiar with using technology. Some key preparations that must take place. All participants must receive credentials. So for example, you received credentials to log into this seminar today. All participants have adequate connectivity, and we'll be addressing that in a few moments. All potential exhibits are ready to go in advance. Set up at least 30 minutes prior. So when you come to a deposition, typically now our reporter and videographer will already be in a remote setting before the deposition starts, at least 30 minutes ready to go, so you, as the participants, can log in early. Participants review our practice guide. We have a fantastic practice guide on veritext.com/remote that really puts together an encyclopedia of knowledge gained over the last 12 years from our hundreds of staff who've worked with attorneys like you, how to not just learned how to set up a deposition, but have learned a lot about what are the best practices for remote depositions. So I do urge you and perhaps your staff to have a look at that practice guide. So let's start getting into the meat of it all, okay? So today we are on a Zoom session, right? We're on a Zoom webinar. When you take a deposition, for example, at VERITEXT, We use a private curated version of Zoom that has the level of security that you would want for depositions, but also has that accessibility and ease of use that has made Zoom so popular. Hence, we are using that platform to ensure it is easy for participants to join the depositions. But let's take a look at the requirements. To attend a deposition, you need a computer, or you could use a tablet or an iPad. You need a webcam, either on your computer or a separate webcam. You also need strong internet speed, and you need a telephone. Now, many of you might be on this webinar on the computer audio, and that's perfectly fine for this webinar. However, what we would say for a deposition, when you're logging into any remote session, whether it's Zoom or Microsoft Teams or Google application, it doesn't matter. You will always have an option to join the audio by your phone as opposed to by computer. And we strongly recommend you do that because, especially because we're working from home, internet can fluctuate. 8 o'clock in the morning, my internet is fine. By 9 o'clock, my spouse, my kids, my dog, my cat, my parakeet are on Zoom and TikTok and God knows what, and all of a sudden my internet's not so stable. So I could freeze on the Zoom video. But if I'm actually talking on my phone, a landline speakerphone or a cell phone with little earphones, I am still going to be heard by the reporter who's looking to capture that verbatim record. So a best practice in almost all instances is to connect by phone, okay? And it's very important that when you're setting up depositions, and this comes back to, and you know, Jamie will be talking about this a little bit later with me when we're talking about how do we get these depositions to move forward, right, in a tone of civility and everybody working together. Part of what is important that your service provider, like we do at VERITEXT, make sure that you introduce us to the other parties taking part in the deposition, so we can also make sure that they meet requirements and that the witnesses meet requirements and have testing as well. So there is advanced preparation. And I'm sure Adam can vouch to this as well, that once you start doing these remote depositions, it really becomes the norm. But certainly for the first depo you take, you want to do your practice and testing. Testing bandwidth for your internet, very important, right? You can easily do a speed test. You can Google it, just Google speed test and run one. We also have one on our website that you can access. Now, a little tip, when you're running your speed test, run it on the computer you're going to use for your deposition and run it in the location you are doing your deposition. We had a client who actually, excuse me, the witness ran the speed test and then decided to take their deposition at a completely different location, and no speed test was done and the internet was choppy. So just a little, again, things we wouldn't think about, right? Because we're used to going into our conference room or going into a VERITEXT office to take a depo where we don't have to consider these things. Okay. Here we come into noticing language, and we can definitely in post webinar materials provide example of noticing language. When we're noticing depositions, obviously we want to be very careful in the language we're using, and we want to make sure that we are letting people know that it is a remote deposition, and also that you are using the technology such as Exhibit Share or a VERITEXT web deposition, doing this over the video as well. So we can provide examples of notices. And Jamie, I'm going to pause here to see if you've got anything to add in about noticing a deposition.
Yes, so we've noticed a few of these depositions recently in highly contentious cases where opposing counsel was very resistant to doing anything remotely, mediation and depositions. But we were at a phase where, in multiple cases that I have right now, where we needed to take depositions and that those were necessary before getting to mediation. And both of those things were either on the books, on the calendar, or in the process of being scheduled when shelter in place hit. So pushing them to do remote depositions was a big deal. And we ended up noticing some remote depositions in this setting. And so something that we did in our notice language was to put the whole emergency rule 11 right now, which allows the deposition officer to be in a remote location with the deponent. So previously in California, if you did do a remote deposition, still for the swearing in purposes of your deponent, the court reporter and the deponent needed to be in one room together. And so there's a rule right now that allows them to be separate. That rule stays in place during the state of emergency and 90 days after the state of emergency ends. So hopefully something that'll come out of this whole situation is going to be a law that puts that more permanently in place so that remote depositions can continue to go forward without those two people together. But right now, we're putting that entire rule into our deposition notices.
That's such a great idea. Thanks, Jamie. That was great. Okay. Pause here for a moment to think about security, right? So if we think about it, we are all working from home, right? So we've taken our laptops from the law firms, we've taken our laptops from VERITEXT, we're working from home. So security is more important than ever. And so when you're looking at doing depositions, it's very important that you ensure you're working with a provider who has all the security certifications needed, brings that end-to-end encryption on your deposition invitations that you get, and ensures that nobody can come into your deposition inadvertently or accidentally on purpose, right? So security is very important. So do always make sure that the provider that you are working with has the necessary security protocols in place. At VERITEXT, we're HIPAA, PII, SSE compliant, and everything is stored in the secure Amazon private cloud. Okay. So just a little brief summary here. Again, what we're going to be looking at right now is the remote deposition components: video, audio, exhibits, real time, and also a videotaping of proceedings. And of course, some of you will never videotape, some of you will. So do bear with us while we try to accommodate the very different types of practice types that we have here. Okay. Connecting to a session, obviously very simple, very easy. You want to make sure that when you log into your session, again, like I talked about earlier, you log into a computer as a participant. And of course, as I said, best practice on any sort of meeting that you're entering, try to use the phone system instead. Okay. Here is an example of what a Zoom deposition looks like. And you can see here that your witness is front and center. And in the Zoom interface, we can't do this with you all because you're in a webinar, but in the Zoom interface, you have choices as a participant in a meeting to either have a speaker view, meaning that the person who's speaking becomes the largest image video in front of you, and everybody else goes to a small video. You also have the opportunity to do what's called pinning. So you click on the video of your witness and that pins. So no matter who is talking, the witness is always front and center. So whether you're taking or defending, typically you would want to pin to your witness so they're front and center. You'll also notice over here, there is the opportunity for instant messaging. In our world, instant messaging, we only allowed public and instant messaging. In other words, only allowing instant messaging that goes between everybody who is in the deposition, and it's more for an off-the-record type remarks. Can we go for lunch? My audio is bad. Can we take a break? We do not allow private instant messaging for security reasons, just in case somebody makes a mistake in haste in the deposition. Okay. Here is another view of taking a deposition with the real-time text scrolling. Now, for some of you in your practice, you may use real time all the time. Some of you may not. So let me talk a little bit about real time for you. Real time is the ability for you to see the live streaming text coming in from the court reporter during the deposition. And it gives you a lot of benefits of being able to have that verbatim testimony at your fingertips. So for example, I can use kind of make up a story here. Let's say, for example, Adam, you were my witness. I might have asked you a question before lunch break, and I might come back in and I might pause my text and take a look at it and go, you know, I'm not really happy with Adam's answer. Now, if I didn't have real time, I might look at my chicken scratch notes that I read an hour ago before lunch, and I kind of remember what Adam said. I'm not entirely sure. But because I have more verbatim testimony, I can go back in and I can, rather than going to the court reporter and asking my court reporter to do a readback, I can go to Adam and I can say, Adam, before the lunch break, I asked you what color was the sky, and it was red. Now, may I remind you, you are still under oath. Would you like to add anything to your answer? Is there anything you would like to change?
No, I think it's a perfectly good answer. Thank you.
All right, look at you. What a perfect witness Adam is. Right? So anyway, that was, lovely dramatization, and we'll get our Oscars after lunch. And so the idea here is that real time can add an extra layer of value, not for all of your depositions, depending on your practice type, but potentially for some of your key depositions. It brings back some of the control that people find they feel, I think it's more perception, they feel they are losing control because they are not in the deposition room. And having the real time brings back that element of control at your deposition. Okay.
And as a practice point here, you can see in that image that the screen gets very full. So if you don't have two screens that you're going to use during a deposition, this might not be something for you. So having that extra screen, if you're going to have a live feed, is very important. Otherwise, things get smaller and smaller as you have more windows.
And one,
sorry, Adam, go on.
Yeah, one recommendation I do have for remote depositions in general is if you have the option of working with either multiple screens or even a second computer. When I take remote depositions, I come into the office, I set up my laptop next to my work office, my work computer. It just sometimes makes it easier dealing with exhibits. We're going to talk about all that, but if that is an option for you for remote depositions, it might allow for certain things to go smoothly. Obviously, if it's not an option, then you can. But if you have that option, it is helpful during remote depositions to have access to a second computer.
I would add to that, even an iPad as a second screen is sufficient. Just something, because if you have an exhibit share tool, you have real time, and you have Zoom, that's 3 different windows you're going to have to be looking at.
Exactly, and that's really what this illustration here is all about. So, Jamie, it was like you knew I was coming to this next slide, and you didn't, but you knew. I love it. And so the point is that if you are using multiple technologies, and again, depending on your practice type, you may or may not be, but if you are using multiple virtual deposition by video, real time, and potentially an exhibit presentation tool such as Exhibit Share, you can either size them, move them to different monitors, even different devices. So for example, I have my iPad with me here, so I could easily have real time on my iPad, just put over here to the side while I'm participating in the deposition in front of me. So your choice is how you want to do things. Definitely plan ahead. Okay. All right, so here's some different views here. It looks like we have a question coming in. Here's just some different views. I'm going to swing through these quite quickly. Jamie, yes, do we have a good question?
So we did get a question here, and they said, we've recommended having multiple monitors for the attorneys. Is one monitor enough for the witness? And yes, one is usually enough for a witness. So the witness will be mostly viewing documents and then seeing a feed of the attorneys. So they typically don't have a real-time feed. They don't need to reference other things. They don't need to drag and drop exhibits in, and they're not keeping track of other things. So typically for the witnesses, yes, one monitor is sufficient for them.
Exactly. Thank you, Jamie. And again, and you guys can see even our webinar here, right? I'm sharing my screen with you, and our Zoom video meeting has got smaller. So if the witnesses are viewing exhibits, they can still see the questioning attorney, but they're focusing where you want them to be, right? Which is on the document. Looks like we have another question. Okay.
I don't see a question.
Oh, maybe it just popped up again, no problems. So these are just some views, the different options that you have. And again, as I say, you can split these between the different screens. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at videography. Okay, and let me just do something for un momento. I just want to turn on my audio here, so you guys can see this. Okay. All right.
Finished video product will look like. As you can see, it looks like a normal videotape deposition. There's the time code, there'll be the reading on and off the record, and this can be synchronized to your transcript for easy clip creation.
Okay, so that video clip that we just took is Mike, our colleague, who is showing us what it looks like when a videographer is videotaping remote depositions. So again, if you are videotaping, you might think, well, how can we videotape? Because, you know, normally we have a videographer, they've got 10 pounds of material on a cart and they have the background. How can we possibly videotape in a remote setting? The good news is you can, and we're going to talk about how you do that. So first of all, you always have to order video just like you ordinarily would if you want to videotape, and we provide a videographer. What happens from I suppose, a mechanics part is that the videographer also joins our session just like a court reporter would do. The videographer is in the session and they are pinning to the witness, okay? And they are using a screen capture software in correlation with their video equipment. So they're modulating the audio and the visual, and they are also going on and off the record with the court reporter. And you end up with the usual finished end product, as Mike said in that video. Now, in terms of preparation for videoing depositions, when we are videotaping a deposition, we will always provide to the opposing counsel just a quick, brief summary of some best practices for the witness in terms of curating their case behind them. And then when the witness logs in, my videographer might say, you need to close the blind behind you. You should probably move slightly to the left or right. So literally, my videographer will do exactly what he or she normally does. And even though it looks like we're recording the whole screen here, that is not what's happening. This is what's happening. We are just capturing the witness only, okay? So very simple to videotape depositions.
And this practice does vary by vendor. So if you're not going to go with VERITEXT, if you're using someone else, ask them what their videographer captures. If they only capture the witness, which is VERITEXT practice, or if they do something else, if you will have others in that shot. So check with your vendor on that one.
And they really, the civil code does not allow for anybody to be videotaped except for the witness unless the court order says otherwise. So if somebody's saying, hey, I can provide you with something and it's just a video of the entire screen, that's probably not a path you want to go down. All right. So let's take a look a little bit about witness preparation. I'm going to mention a few points here, and please, Jamie and Adam, after all, you are the attorneys, please pop in with any thoughts on the actual practicalities. What I'm looking at are just some things that, again, we wouldn't normally have to think about, but now they're becoming our daily reality. Obviously, when we're talking about preparing our witness, avoid windows and other reflective, distracting backgrounds like noisy art or wallpaper. Record where lighting is even without excessive shadows, etc. Right? Remove any props that may disturb the camera or create a witness stereotype.
Yeah.
Next one is what? Please, Adam.
You're about to get into it, but if this is your client being deposed, it might be worth spending a couple minutes with them before with the practice Zoom or whatever to see what they're going to look like. Get in the room that they're going to be in. It is going to be, if it's going to be videotaped of them, you want them to look good. So definitely check that out. The lighting with these Zoom things can look weird and funky. So it's worth it to check ahead of time.
It's also important to check
Absolutely.
that your client has a private space for the deposition. So, a living room is not ideal. Not only can you get echoes and maybe some other distractions in there, but you need to be in a private space. You saw in the example, someone was in a room with the door closed. I'm here with all of my doors closed. And that makes the private space that you should have that for a deposition. So you want to cover that with your client if your client is the deponent.
And I'll just give you guys a little kind of funny story. We had a deposition in Southern California about, Jonathan's smiling because he knows what I'm going to say. We had a deposition in Southern California, and I'm not kidding you, this is real. The deponent was on an iPad in their car, and they were stopped at like some sort of fast food drive-through. And the deposition, you could see the witness, and you could also see his wife in the car, and the wife is in the car on the phone. We're going to make millions. We're going to make millions. And that was all on the record. I am not kidding you. So there you go. So that is probably the worst possible thing that could happen. But again, depending on our practice type and depending on our profile of a witness, remember, we have people who have never been deposed before, right? And we have people from all different walks of life. So we really want to consider that ahead of the deposition to make sure that they are in the best light possible during the deposition. Okay. Another thing about witness prep, and again, it will depend on your service provider, but at VERITEXT, we provide practice rooms where you can come in to do trial runs, where you can come in and actually prepare with your witness And again, look at that curating of the spot for them and showing them how they would interact with a deposition. And sometimes we do these with all counsel together, or sometimes we do them with the defending attorney only as well. So doing some preparation and actively working with your provider to provide you that safe space to do that preparation is very important.
And this is a point that I've used to apply pressure to opposing counsel to agree to a remote deposition, because you really don't want to compel a remote deposition, especially right now with the courts closed. It gets really difficult. But I've said to counsel that we chose VERITEXT because they're very easy. This is my preferred vendor. And one of the things that I use is their trainings are great. You will get one-on-one personal training. Do it now. It's going to be free for you and free for your client as part of this deposition. You need it for your practice. As an attorney, if you're not using all modes of communication to advocate for your client, you're probably not doing the best job you can do. So I've told opposing counsel to go out there and take this training, and it's very comprehensive, it's very easy. And if you go through, not only they have some great video resources, but a personalized training that's very similar to the CLE that we're doing today, you get in and practice. And so that's something that we offer and we use to try to obtain consent so that we're not fighting over the fact that the deposition is remote.
That's great. Thanks, Jamie. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about is a little bit back to the kind of the behavioral side and setting the tone for how we're going to take depositions. And again, back to what comes to us often, and I'm sure Jamie and Adam will have something to pop in on this as well, is clients will come to us and say, oh, I don't want to take the deposition because I'm worried about the technology. Well, great, we're going to train you. We're going to make sure you're okay. I'm still worried because I'm worried that I don't have control. I'm worried what my opposing counsel is going to do. I'm worried that they might pass notes to the witness, etc. Okay? So one of the things that you can do to control that is offer admonitions, right? So typically at the beginning of a deposition, you will offer an admonition on the record. And so you literally just structure your admonition, add an additional admonition to talk about how we want people to behave, be that counsel, be that the witness, making sure that they understand. For example, in this example I've got up here, you refrain from using hand signals, text messages, that if you wish to take a break, you may do so, but everything that you say while you're in the room on the record is part of the record. So setting the tone and standard of behavior. And I have actually known attorneys, and I was talking to an attorney about this yesterday, who will literally ask the witness, and I'm going to do it right here, to take their webcam and put it around the room so they can see if there's anybody in the room with them. They will also ask the witness to verbally acknowledge that there is nobody in the room with them as well. Guys, anything to add in on admonitions, Adam or Jamie?
No, this is just an important point that, you got to admonish them to not text message with their lawyer. I mean, when you're in an in-person deposition, you can see if there's communications going back and forth and the lawyer can't pull anything off. You just have to admonish the witness. You can't be text messaging with your attorney. You can take a break if you need to speak with them. A reminder to, if it's your witness or otherwise, that if they are going to take a break, they need to make sure that they're on mute, leave the room. So then, if it's your client, they don't think that they're on a break, talking just to you, and they're still, they haven't muted themselves. But when my client was deposed, I made sure that they were muted, told them to leave the room, and we did a phone call and had our communication. So there's just a couple things with these remote depositions to be mindful of.
Yeah.
And then just another consideration, in live depositions, you do have attorneys who are obstructionists, who are both physically, touching their client to maybe stop them from answering a question, or who just object with baseless objections or whatever. You get a little give and take here. So some of those attorneys are actually quieter in a remote setting. It's something about interrupting people in this setting where you can't talk over each other. It does discourage people from doing it a bit. So you might have a risk here where there's a risk that opposing counsel is going to text the deponent. But you've also kind of gotten a little bit in the sense that there is less interrupting, I find, when you do these things. So there's give and take. Things are just a little bit different. And practicing and doing it will get you your experience and find your comfort level.
Exactly. Thank you. We do have a question in from Richard. Provided clients and I social distance, is there any prohibition to attorney and clients being in the same room, example, in a conference room at my office? I'll tell you from VERITEXT perspective, we have opened a limited number of our offices around the country. And normally we have 135 offices available for depositions to take place in them. Right now, every state is going to be different. And even here in the Bay Area, right, every city is different in what is or is not allowed. Currently in our offices, we are allowing clients to come in, but we're using all of our conference room of half the seating, so everybody is 6 foot apart. We're not serving water, we're not serving food. Everybody must use hand sanitizer and wear masks for the entire time that you were together. And I will tell you, having attended virtually today a deposition where people were wearing masks, I would much have preferred, if I was an attorney, to be doing the virtual deposition, because when someone is wearing a mask, you cannot see their facial expressions, and that makes such a difference, I believe, during a deposition. And so I think different firms will have different takes on this, but most people, because of liability, health and safety, and pure common sense, are saying we can do it, but we'll do it with limitations. And I think because of those limitations, I think we'll see that the remote depositions will still be the norm. Anything to add on to that, anybody?
Well, I would just add, I think what Richard was asking is if it's okay for him and his client to be in his conference room. And I would say that's fine. I would just announce to the room that we're in the same room. I still wouldn't want to hide that.
And then you also want to double check that your audio is going to be right? You can't both have the same audio playing in the room. You'll get feedback and stuff. So you want to check your settings and make sure that it works. And that, you know, perhaps the attorney needs to have earphones in so that the witness can actually have audio playing, or whatever works out. But you need to check your audio in that situation.
Yes, and I think that if you are in the same room with your client, you also do need to be on video. And we have seen many of our clients actually put it on their case management order, that everybody's agreed to put it on, that basically moving forward during this time, that everybody who is participating in depositions is on video. So that's just something that's quite prevalent as well. Okay, another little point on this page here, and then we're going to be actually heading into the world of exhibits quite soon, is going on and off the record. So people will say, how do I go on and off the record? And it really is just like we would normally do it. Because remember, the court reporter, imagine if I was your court reporter, I'm here, you would just say, I want to go off the record. And then I would say, we're going off the record at 3:15 p.m., whatever the time is. So it happens just as it normally does. Caveat to that, though, very important, and I think Jamie was alluding to this earlier, but when you go off the record, remember that people can still see you and people can still hear you, okay? So a few points. In the Zoom setting, when you're in a Zoom setting, this is different because we're in a webinar, you have the option to mute yourself and also turn off your video. You also have the option to leave the meeting altogether and just log in after a break. You also have the option in most of these virtual environments to also have private breakout rooms where individuals can go to. So there are lots of options. But again, word of warning, especially for your witnesses, because remember, they're not used to doing depositions. Remind them that off the record, people can still see them and they can still hear them. And we have definitely seen witnesses say things off the record that they probably should not have said because they're not completely muted. So that's just something to think about. Okay. All right, and then kind of back to that point, who should be on camera? And again, our recommendation always is anybody who is actively participating in the deposition should be on camera. A client, somebody second chairing does not need to be on camera. Everybody does need to be on the record, of course, and the court reporter will make sure she has everybody identify themselves at the start of the deposition, just as you would do in a regular deposition. Turning off smart devices. This is actual testimony from a deposition, and it has happened. And my Siri just went off on my iPad there when I put it down. So basically, turn off your Amazon Alexa, because otherwise it might start talking to you during a deposition. Jonathan's smiling because his Alexa is up to all sorts of craziness in his house. Our reporter opening statement. So here's just a sample script. So our reporter will help you set the tone of the deposition. And Jamie, you made a good point there about sometimes, you know, some of those attorneys will be adversarial and they're, you know, taking care of the witness and doing things they probably shouldn't do. What we have found is that civility has really gone up a notch in depositions in this remote environment. I think part of it is a tentativeness that is brought about by doing something new, and part of it is just with the environment that it is, it actually in many ways precludes some of the obstructionist tactics that you might see in a conference room. But then we might also affect the deposition, not purposely, but any of us, by talking over each other, right? By putting in objections too fast. Because remember that reporter's still trying to get the record. So the reporter will generally read off the sample opening, talking about making sure, please don't interrupt each other, please don't talk over each other, please think about any ambient noise around you, and also talk about marking exhibits, which again, Jonathan will talk about again. So our reporters are all, and I'm sure this is industry-wide, all of our reporters have been retrained. And in fact, we have an article out right now about reporters who were clamoring from day one to go out and buy new webcams, better audio equipment to make sure that they could handle depositions. And so they have now been trained to think about the things that can affect the deposition. So they will work with you at the start of a deposition to make sure everyone's on the same page. Swearing in the witness. And again, we're just going to go to two quick things here. Obviously, we've always had the ability to remotely swear in the witness on federal rules as long as there is a stipulation on Rule 30. And then, of course, in California, we now have the ability to swear in the witness remotely as well. There are some resources here that you might want to look at, and we can certainly send these on later for distribution. This is just the American Society of Notaries. It's giving you an update on the notary procedures around the country. Okay, now we're going to go into exhibits. And very briefly, I'm just going to quickly talk about the different types of ways to introduce exhibits. And then I'm going to pass the baton over to Jonathan, who's actually going to go in and work with exhibits. And I thought, and Adam made a very keen point in this, obviously, we have a wide variety of attorneys attending today with different types of practices. So we want to make sure that we cover all different ways to share exhibits, okay? Over here on the left, sent in advance. So exhibits can be sent in advance to witness and other parties. They can be sent either physically or digitally. Now, a few points on this that we have seen. Number one, I would say that when we're sending exhibits physically, we want to think with everything that's going on in the world, are the exhibits going to get there in time? Health and safety, who is handling those exhibits? Those are things to think about. Probably a better way to send exhibits is via an FTP site so that people will receive them and they can print them if they want or view them on their computer. But does that witness have a computer? These are things to think about, right? Know your audience, I suppose, would be the way to say it. The other thing to think about again, and I'm sure you've already thought of this, is do I want to send my exhibits in advance? Do I want people to know what I'm going to be asking questions on? With some practice types and with certain exhibits, that's not going to be a problem. With others, that's not feasible. And in that instance, I would go to my second diagram here, send your exhibits one set at a time. And that would be either during the deposition, you can email or FTP exhibits to the witness and to the counsel, and or you can use the screen sharing that's available in applications like Zoom. And Jonathan is going to be talking about that later. Now, when we are sending exhibits, I definitely say try to send them over secure links or FTP rather than emails, because if you send over an email, somebody might say the file's too big, it didn't get to me, sorry, we're going to have to take a break in the deposition, so these can be stalling tactics. So when we're looking at exhibits, we want to think of our audience in terms of what we need to do to get them the exhibits, but also to make sure that they can easily access them and there's no obstacles. The last thing that we would look at over here on the right-hand side are exhibit-specific tools. So there are various tools on the market that allow one to literally mirror the paper process and allow you to introduce exhibits on the record in a paperless fashion. And Jonathan is going to be talking about that. So I'm going to stop screen sharing. And as I'm doing that, as Jonathan gets set up, Adam, would you like to share some thoughts before Jonathan shares his screen or as he's setting up?
Yes, I'm excited to talk about exhibits, finally. Thank you for that. There are a couple options for pulling off exhibits in a deposition, and a couple of points about mailing them ahead of time. If that's just what you're more comfortable with technology-wise, you just think it's the easiest. And depending on the case, it might even make sense to do it that way rather than deal with a PDF or whatever. Couple things to keep in mind. One, it does require a little bit more advanced preparation for your deposition. You just have to be mindful of that because you're going to be mailing them in advance of the deposition. As was indicated, you're going to need some more time, a couple more days. And so if you're like me, oftentimes you find yourself the night before a deposition, the morning of a deposition, you think of another exhibit you want to use. It's going to be too late. So it requires you to have a little bit more advanced preparation for that deposition. That's just the nature of the beast if you're going to be mailing them. Another point about mailing exhibits, if that's what you choose to do, there is the option of mailing them in a sealed envelope. And that if you want to maintain a level of surprise with the exhibits so that the witness isn't looking them over, opposing counsel doesn't get to look them over and give the witness some clues about what you might be going into, you can mail it in a sealed envelope. And then on the record, you just articulate the witness opening up the sealed envelope, articulate the lawyer, opposing counsel, opening up the sealed envelope like you would when you articulate sealed transcripts during a trial. So that's an option if you want to maintain the secrecy. We're going to be getting into what I think is the easiest way to do this all, which is exhibit share. And Jonathan's going to explain what that is all about. One thing to keep in mind with that is it does cost. It is an additional cost. So if that doesn't make sense for the case or for your firm, you have to keep that in mind. But if cost is not an issue, you want to be as comfortable as possible with exhibits. Exhibit share, I think, is really the best way. And as I said, Jonathan's going to explain what that's all about. And then there's always just making sure that you get the exhibits to the court reporter. That's perhaps the most important. And if you find yourself scrambling, but you do want to refer to an exhibit during the deposition, you could refer to the exhibit on share screen. And if you haven't used share screen on Zoom, just in the middle, down at the bottom, anyone has the option of sharing their screen. And so if you just have the document pulled up on your computer and you do share screen, and if you haven't done it before, maybe you want to practice with a Zoom with a friend, but you can have the witness look at a document you have on your computer. And then it's just a matter of making sure that that document gets to the court reporter and there's appropriate stipulations with counsel about that. So those are kind of the ways you can either mail it ahead, you can do emailing either ahead of time with a bunch of PDFs or sharing the files, emailing during the deposition if you want to maintain the secrecy. And then, as I said, exhibit share, which I think is, if cost is not an issue, it's definitely the way to go. So.
And just to interject one comment, you can do combinations of those things. So I have a deposition exactly a week from today. We are going to send them a large portion of our exhibits, discovery responses, things that are, obvious that we're going to ask about, and it will give the deponent time to go through those with his attorney so that when we bring something up during a remote deposition, we're going to say, we sent these to you X number of days ago. Did you review this with your attorney? So you're familiar with this document. And with long documents, that's an advantage because they've already reviewed it. They don't need to say, I need 20 minutes to read through this thing. They don't. So we only send a portion of the documents. We don't number them in any particular fashion. We're just sharing information with opposing counsel. And we also use that as, another leverage to get them to agree, like, hey, we'll even give you a preview of most of our exhibits before we get there, and you'll have days to cover those with your deponent. So agree to a remote deposition. So that's something that we've done and that I am doing next week. So all kinds of options.
So I'm going to just jump in here. I think we have 10 more minutes, Jamie? You're mute, Jamie. I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
Probably about 15.
Okay, good. So I have done a ton of these demos where I show people my screen here, and I'm going to go ahead and show you exhibit share. Can you all see my screen? Good.
Yeah.
All right, so welcome to exhibit share. Once you, this is a proprietary tool that we developed internally, and it was, we had developed it about a couple years ago, and of course, then this pandemic hit, and this is where this has really taken off. I think we had just a few depositions going forward with this, and now we have 100 depositions a day going forward with this. And I was talking to the designer of this program, his name's Mike, Claire mentioned him earlier, and he gave me all sorts of amazing statistics. There's been no errors, I think he said like 100,000 exhibits have been introduced. It's been a remarkable tool. So I'm going to just give you a brief show on how this works. So in this main screen here, this is where most of it happens. On the left side is the folder tree. And as you can see, I opened this up. There would be the case caption. That's another case that I was working on. And then inside of the case, there's depositions. If you have multiple depositions, each witness gets their own folder. So you'll see here the deposition of Jane Doe. Within Jane Doe, there are two subfolders. There's the marked exhibits, and then there's the private folder. And just as the private folder indicates, the name indicates, that is private. So your firm, you, and maybe you're a paralegal or your associate, can have access to it. The court reporter, the defending attorney, the witness, none of them will even see your private folder when they log in. All they're going to see is marked exhibits, okay? So once you log in and you see these folders and you confirm that, yes, this is Jane Doe deposition that I'm going to be taking, you click in your private folder and you'll see, it would be empty, but someone just loaded this up for me because I need something. But now you're ready to load your exhibits. So you simply bring up a folder that has your documents, and I'm just going to pick a couple random ones here. Let's do these 3. And I'm going to drag and drop them right onto the screen. And you'll see, depending on your bandwidth and the size of the documents, they load pretty quickly. Sorry. So now that you have everything loaded and you're ready to introduce a document, all you do is simply select the document you want to introduce. So I'm going to select admonition language, and you'll notice this new menu opens up on the right side. We're going to select introduce exhibit. And it's going to take me to this window where I get to number this exhibit. It automatically goes sequentially. So the last person that used this was exhibit 7. I can change this, and it's a 9-character alphanumeric max. So I'm going to go Pearl 01. As you can see, I've done this before. And I'm going to introduce this exhibit. If it's a PDF, and only if it's a PDF, look at that, it puts a sticker right on there. We have yet to find a file type that you can't use, but only PDFs does it apply the sticker. Once you've taken a look and you're okay with it, you simply click on View Exhibit, and it opens up into the main screen. Once it's in the main screen, you need to announce to the room, I've introduced an exhibit. Everyone clicks on the marked exhibit folder, which refreshes the folder, and they'll be able to see it. So outside here, I go into marked exhibit. If I was the deponent, I see the exhibit, Pearl, admonition language. Now, I always like to point this out. If you notice, this tool, it still maintains the name of the document that you uploaded. So I would say you make sure you name those documents in a way that's okay with everyone to see. If you name it smoking gun, everyone sees smoking gun. So you open up the document, and there you have it. And if I go scroll down to the bottom here, you'll see there's my sticker. And this is the admonition language I think that was talked about earlier. A couple other things to note. You see this magnifying glass. If you want to zoom in, you can zoom in as such. If this was a multi-page document, everyone in the room can be on a different page. So the defending attorney could look at page 7, the witness could be on page 3, the reporter could be on page 9, and meanwhile, you want to talk about page 5. So literally and figuratively, you have to make sure everyone's on the same page. So before you address it, just make sure you announce that.
You know, sorry, we're there. Even if you are doing this exhibit share, when I'm taking testimony of a witness and I'm using an exhibit, even if I've marked it that way, I still like using share screen, so then everyone is looking at the same thing and you're asking questions about it. So that just is one way to make sure everyone is on the same page, as you said, but that's what I like to do.
And by the way, the other nice piece, if you do that, Adam, is then you have the ability to annotate. You give the ability to annotate not only to yourself, but to the witness. So I could go and use, if you all notice in Zoom, there's the ability to annotate. So if you want to do that, you can have the witness annotate, and then you can save it, and then you can introduce that marked exhibit as a new exhibit number. After you've introduced an exhibit, you see down here, there's this previously marked. It creates a new folder with that witness name, and inside that folder will be all of the exhibits that you introduced that day. And as the case goes on and you have multiple depositions in a case, each witness will have their own folder under the previously marked exhibit category, and you can reintroduce those exhibits at a later date. Claire, is there anything that I didn't talk about with regards to exhibit share?
Well, I think we should talk a little bit about the practical side of introducing the exhibits in terms of how we're going to interface with our court reporter as well as our witness, right? So I think that's important. Whatever mechanism we're using of introducing our exhibits, whether we're just using screen share or whether you're using our exhibit share tool. And Jonathan, why don't you just upload maybe a multi-page document there while we're doing this, and we'll go ahead and introduce it. But I think what's important is that we're making sure whenever we're doing remote deposition, we want to be more exaggerated than we normally would be in terms of our getting everything on the record, right? We want to make sure that there's no chance for anyone to object to something, and that we're getting verbal acknowledgements from my witness. So for example, I would introduce this document, and I would say, Madam Court Reporter, I'm now introducing Exhibit 1 on the deposition record, and this is the practical guide to taking depositions with VERITEXT. My beginning Bates number is B529, my end Bates number is B547, right? So I'm making sure that I am getting a good record. And then, let's say, for example, Jonathan, you were my witness. I'd say, Jonathan and counsel, you may now go to the marked exhibits folder and look at Exhibit 1. Jonathan, please take a moment to familiarize yourself with the document. Now, if I was Adam, I might share my screen to make sure Jonathan is seeing what I'm seeing. So this is a multi-page document. So if you could zoom in a bit there, Jonathan, for us on page 1. What I might say is, now, Jonathan, I am now going to share my screen. You've just acknowledged that you have a copy of this document open, and now I'm going to share my screen for a moment. I want to point you to paragraph 1. Can you read the title of that paragraph for me, please?
Am I your witness? Sorry. Some key service points. Secure service. Is that? Perfect.
Yes, you've read the title of that paragraph for me. So what I'm doing is I'm getting his acknowledgement that he's going to be in the same place as I want him to be. And now I'll say, Jonathan, fantastic. If you now want to go to your copy of the document, and please locate that paragraph, that's where we're going to be talking for the next few minutes. So you can see that you want to get.
Remember that when you have a videographer, they're not capturing this. So you need to verbalize what you're doing. You need to say, I'm now sharing page 2, because they're not getting page 2. They're getting the witness's face as they're supposed to. So you need to say, we're marking on page 3. Please, for the record, the witness has circled X, Y, and Z. Just be descriptive of any annotations you're making on the document. And be overly descriptive of what you're doing, because what you're seeing in this webinar is not what gets recorded on your video.
Exactly. And I should add, we're not going to show that today for CLE purposes, but depending on your practice type, so for example, we have a lot of clients in construction defect and toxic tort cases, and they're using a lot of native files, videos, CAD files, etc. And they sometimes want to capture the witness's interaction. So a second component can be added. While I'm videotaping my witness, I'm also having recording done of all the interaction that Jonathan is doing here. And that can be produced at the end of the deposition. So you do have the ability to do that. But to Jamie's point, and as I mentioned earlier, over-descriptive, exaggerate, get everything on the record to stop those objections. And this is, again, back to Adam, I don't know if you'd come in on this as well, but back to why this exhibit share tool is also very important is if you're screen sharing with people, you know, opposing counsel can object that, well, I would like my client to look at the document privately. I don't want them to be scrolling and you can see them. Well, we need a copy of the document. We don't have enough time to read it when you're sharing. When you've got exhibit share, they all have their own copy of the document. So, Jonathan, if you could just go back out to your marked exhibit folder for a moment to visualize what that looks like. So imagine all of us on this webinar right now, we are currently going to be in the marked exhibit folder and we can see the document in there. Okay.
So we are just about out of time. We started 5 minutes late and we're almost at 5 minutes. There was one question that was submitted that I think is a good question for Adam. Adam, I'm gonna read it to you. It's in the question and answer box. They want to know how to handle documents that are brought by the deponent pursuant to the deposition notice. Have you had that happen in a remote setting?
You know, with my depositions, I haven't had that yet, but, you know, I think for one, it would be finding out if they are doing something like exhibit share and you can upload it as well. The other thing is just making sure that you have, you know, a PDF version of the document and either, you know, figuring out how you're going to share it. You know, if you know all the documents you have ahead of time, you could always mail that if you get the notice with enough time, and, you know, you could potentially mail those documents out if you want. So those are a couple ideas that come to mind for addressing that.
So, and I think to augment that, Jamie, we have seen this with our clients. I've got a bunch of clients who do have the sort of depositions where typically the attorney and the witness will walk in and go, hey, here we've got, this is what they do. They bring in physical paper. And honestly, if we're all remote, it's just not possible. So I just say, if you have those type of cases, the best you can do is just confer with opposing counsel ahead of time and say, look, typically this is what happens. This can't happen because we're all remote. Then back to Adam's point, if you can get those documents from the witness, get them into PDF and turn them over to me. That's really the only answer when everybody's remote.
Let's see, do we have any other questions from anyone? I'm going to quickly share my screen because we have noticed a deposition remotely where we want documents to be brought. We haven't gotten to the deposition yet, so I'm going to just share it really quickly. You can see my deposition notice. And can you see that there?
Not yet.
No. Where did it go? Looks like it's showing on my side. Let's see. Well, I don't know.
There it is. There it is. Just showed up.
There. Okay, I was just slow to upload, huh? So you can see my document demands are within my notice. And we dropped a footnote down here that says, because this deposition is noticed to proceed by remote means, we asked for an upload. And then we are currently in the meet and confer process talking to them about how this will be carried out. But we actually addressed it in our notice. So you can see we have an entity deponent. We there listed the matters that they're, you know, appearing to testify on, and document demands within there with that footnote there about delivery, and asking if this deposition proceeds in person, that we still ask for electronic delivery and all kinds of stuff. So we have, and there you see, we actually noticed this in the alternative. So up here, remote and in the alternative live. And then we put in all caps here that if everyone agreed in writing that we would do it by other means. So we've really put in a lot of language where everyone had to agree if we're not doing it by the language that we put in our notice. It's, you know, what we hoped was a creative means of getting agreement, and it worked. So we're going forward with this remote deposition in a situation where nobody wanted to originally.
So we can, I think we have to kind of wrap up here, but this presentation was VERITEXT centric, and that's good. They're a good provider. I use them for depositions, but my advice is, if you're preparing for a remote deposition, whatever vendor you're using, and you're uncomfortable about any aspect of it, you got to contact the vendor. They're getting up and running on all this. They have trainings. All the different companies have trainings that are putting on these remote depositions. Put it on the onus on them to teach you how to do it. If you're not sure, if you know, leading into a deposition, contact your vendor, find out how they do it. That's my recommendation for you.
All right, we're going to wrap this up. Thank you, everyone, for speaking today. Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Jonathan. And thank you, Adam, for appearing. Litigation section, thank you for attending. And non-litigation section members, also thank you for attending. We're trying to push out very practical CLEs right now, and we hope that you found this useful.
Thank
Have
you,
a good
everybody.
day, and
Thank you for
everyone
having
stay
us.
safe.
Thank you guys. Appreciate it. Hope this was good. Thank you.